So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
ご機嫌いかがですか？渡辺Danです。On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, Tales of the North Hollywood Curmudgeon, I'm going to be talking about the Academy Awards. Yes, I know, you've heard it all. We've seen a lot of other videos that discuss exactly why the Academy Awards are privileged, that they're separated from the audience, that it's a bunch of rich people complaining about what's wrong with the country while making sure that all the poor people are pushed out of their way so that they can hand out their awards to each other in beautiful dresses. But I want to approach the Academy Awards from another perspective, and that is the perspective of someone who was an insider in the industry for a number of years in that hated position of being in the front office. In other words, we're the ones who would make those decisions. Oh, you should really cut half an hour out of this movie. Or, you know what? That topic won't work with audiences, so maybe we shouldn't spend that much money on it. You know, the people who had a practical approach to the art of making money through entertainment. And from that perspective, I want to say that even though I've mentioned before that the entertainment industry always says it's worse than it's ever been, this time there is an argument to be made that the industry is worse than it's ever been, and the most recent Academy Awards are the kind of proof of it. The fact that the audience for the Oscars between 2014 and now has collapsed by 75%, going from over 40 million to under 10 million is really cataclysmic. And there were a number of decisions behind why that has happened. And some of them, people think it's the first time it's ever happened. No, this isn't the first time that Hollywood has been on a virtue signal rampage, but this is the first time that Hollywood's virtue signaling has in fact had a consequence, because unlike the past where that meretriciousness was balanced by entertaining movies, this is the first time that Hollywood has insisted that there is no genre that is safe from preaching. And this is in fact going to have a severe impact for the mainstream entertainment industry long term. For the independents, for the people who are right now out there making lower budget movies that fill a niche or are attempts to create their own voices, I think you're going to be fine. In fact, I think you're going to be more than fine, because you're actually looking at what the gaps are in terms of what stories are being told. It's not happening on the corporate end anymore, and that is going to be where I focus my difference, is that I'm not blaming the stars, I'm not blaming the writers, I'm not blaming anyone on the above the line. I am blaming the front office for allowing this to happen. And what do I mean by that? The entertainment industry has never been a darling of Wall Street, at least until the 90s. And because of that, all of the people who worked in it were sort of like the shopkeeper who lived above the store. They had to make sure that their customers were happy. As long as your customers were happy, you would be able to make money. And in the process of making that money, you could set aside a certain amount that could be given toward the arts. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was infamous for doing this. For every time they would have a massive hit like Test Pilot, Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy and Myrna Loy, they would do like a classic adaptation. Now, some of those became laughable, like Romeo and Juliet, but a lot of them, like David Copperfield or Little Woman or Pride and Prejudice, actually came out very well. Okay, they're still problematic adaptations, but there was an attempt to raise the overall culture, and that held true all the way until the present. There was always this sense that we need to protect the industry. We need to make movies to make money, to get people's rear ends in seats. And for some reason, and I'm going to go over what some of those reasons are, that message has been lost. But before we get to that, let me remind you that I not only have this YouTube channel, I also have a channel on Bitchute where I do a lot of exclusives, where I talk about sort of the nasty stuff that the YouTubes of the world don't like anyone to speak of. And these are all about some of the real stuff that goes on behind the scenes in Hollywood. Anyway, the reason I'm going to be blaming the front office is because in the past, whenever you had a star who was going out of line, unless they were a massive moneymaker, unless they were someone who had such an unbreakable following that nothing they could say would harm them. What's happened is that now you have stars who are not controlled. And I'm not talking about the Brad Pitts of the world or the ones who are really of such high wattage that they are still unassailable. No, I'm talking about all the way down the food chain. You have actors and actresses and directors and writers and sometimes award winners going out there and saying the most awful things about their audience. Now, I don't know where along the line someone thinks that Tinkerbell is going to come down and sprinkle pixie dust over the world and say, fine, you alienate half of your audience, you make fun of them, you call them hateful names, you say that you don't care if they don't see your movies, and somehow you think you're going to make more money. That makes no sense. So what the difference between the past and now is that with Twitter, there's no attempt by the front office to go to the star and say, you know what? You're about to wreck your career. If you think we're going to keep paying you your $35 million a picture plus a big percentage of the gross, and you are making sure that we cannot make our money back, we're not going to hire you. Instead, just like with many other aspects of Madison Avenue, there's no attention being paid to dollars and cents. The only attention that's being paid is to Twitter, it seems. So something that gets approval on Twitter is by definition meant to imply that that's how the public feels, and it's not. And the result of that is you have movies that do not make their projections. And what do I mean by projections? Before you make a movie, you always do a projection. Here's what it should make if it does rather badly but okay. In other words, people say it's good or very good. It's not great or a definite recommend. And then you have the high, which if the movie does extremely well, it'll make so much money, you cannot believe how profitable it is. Note that this requires theatrical exhibition. So perhaps some of the reason the Oscars have done so badly this year is without theatrical exhibition, you haven't had the opportunity to cultivate that audience, to cultivate that passionate response. So people are being more reactive. Then again, last year's Oscars was also kind of a ratings debacle. And it's attributed, oh, people are racist against Asians. No, it's not. First of all, Parasite's a very average Asian type, really TV movie. Seen a lot of things like that when I was living in Japan. So it wasn't that special. I mean, the only thing that's special about it is you have someone in South Korea seeming to support North Korea. I mean, that was the weird part of that. But that's a different story. The problem is the front office. And the reason the front office is a problem is because those people no longer live over the store. Bob Iger, Bob Chapek, people who are running all of the studios right now couldn't care less that they're working on movies and TV. If it would pay them more money, they'd be very happy to do this in the manufacture of new washing machines. And so there isn't a dedication to keeping the industry going. There's a dedication to how much can I get? I've got mine, so F you to everyone else. I will take my toys and go if I fail here. I'm not going to try to save it. This is the reason behind a lot of cockamamie decisions that have been made by the big studios without regard for the impact it has on the public, who doesn't really pay attention but they'll pay attention on the fringes. And when they hear something on the fringes that sounds wrong, they're going to react. For example, Hollywood's obsession now with saying our past sucks. We made nothing but toxic movies that were racist, sexist, homophobic, and all that, and we disavow them. And other people say, oh, well, it's just a little warning up front. No, it isn't. It's saying, if you like this movie, there's something wrong with you. That's a mistake. You're making hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars off of your legacy library. Stuff that was made 80 years ago came from a different time in the world, and you're bashing it. And you're acting like the stuff you make today is going to somehow be for the ages. It's not. It's going to look every bit as cringy in 80 years if it even exists. And I'm going to say most of it won't. And so you have people at the top who don't care. They are instead focused on on strategy rather than operations. And no studio is better at this than Disney. Note that Bob Iger and Bob Chapek are still not paying attention to the messes that are going on at ABC, at Lucasfilm, and to a certain degree in the Marvel side. Now, most of the Marvel side's fine right now, especially the filmed entertainment, but certainly their comic books have been troubling. And a big part of this is because by focusing with like a laser beam on making the company bigger, of doing destruction against their competition, they have allowed the inmates to run the asylum. And this is nowhere more evident than in Lucasfilm. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Dan, Lucasfilm has made much more than the $4 billion they initially put out there. I'm going to say, are you out of your mind? When you spend $4 billion for an asset, that means that you are expecting within a relatively decent frame of time to make $12 billion. And a lot of that $12 billion was supposed to have come from ancillaries. But if you make main product that audiences feel antagonized by, and then you turn around and say the audience, A, they're dying, so we don't need to worry about them, and B, we don't care because they're a bunch of trash, what do you think is going to happen to your toys? What do you think is going to happen to your t-shirts? Can we say this same thing happened to HBO when they were so intent on the merger with at&t that no one paid attention that they were destroying Game of Thrones, and in the process of doing that, were probably destroying HBO. What has been HBO's follow-up hit? Can we say none? Watchmen bombed. I don't care how many Emmys it won. It bombed. It's not on the air anymore. And there's a reason for that. Because it didn't please the audience. That is the key. Please the audience. So the upper side of the company is focused on strategy. They're allowing content to be made that antagonizes audiences. Stars are saying stuff that causes people to say, I don't want to see your movies anymore, and then acting on it. And then we had the pandemic come in. And what did the pandemic do? It got rid of theaters. And the beauty of theaters is, again, these are profit centers. Most movies do not work. But when you have a hit, you've made so much money, you can cash flow the rest. You can create new stars. You can do all of this wonderful stuff with theatrical. And both Warner Brothers and Disney have basically said, we don't care about theaters anymore. We're going to do everything streaming. Why does streaming not work as well as theaters? Because streaming is available in your home. When you go to a movie in a theater, you are at an exclusive event. Think about how many people in pre-pandemic times wanted to go opening weekend when you know you could go during the second or third week and have no problem getting a seat. It's that exclusive feeling of being the first to have seen it. And you're seeing it in an ideal location where your attention is riveted to the screen. So everything about the movie is set up for you to take it in its highest and best. Once you put it on a streaming platform, it joins thousands of other titles. And yeah, you've done advertising, so it kind of pops, but not as much as a theatrical hit will. In fact, it just becomes part of the general stream of all this stuff that's out there. And you say, well, I'll watch it later. And then later becomes 20 years from now and you've still never seen it. And this is what happens with a lot of the content on Netflix. Note that Nomadland and some of the other movies that really scored at the Oscars, it is not going to make a difference to the Hollywood's bottom line, because it's either going to have an increase in subscribers exclusively based on that movie, or it's not. If it's not, that movie will be forgotten. It will join the realm of how many massive hit cable things that, for all intents and purposes, don't have rerun life because there's not enough episodes. So there's a problem there. There's a problem with the focus on a strategy rather than operations. The second thing is moral hazard. And what's the moral hazard from? The moral hazard was the introduction of streaming, because that created a whole new market. It created a market that was replacing the moribund world of DVD and physical media. Now, did anyone look and say, why are DVDs and physical media starting to really trail off in sales? And I got a dirty secret to tell you. The reason they were trailing off is simply because all of the good titles were already out there. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when you get excited over the release of a remastered Spanish cult horror movie because, wow, this is a great discovery, that means everything else that you want, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 20th priority, you already have. There's just that not that much stuff that wasn't available. So that means that the market was relying only on new things. And when you're relying only on new things and you don't have that backwash of older content that you can continually be feeding into the system, you're going to start decreasing your sales. Once you have over 90% of the population having a DVD player and having already bought all the titles they want, you're either looking at rebuys or you're looking at new stuff that fits in with what people want. But it's not something that's sustainable at that point in terms of increasing every year. In terms of streaming, when streaming first started, it was a new technology. Netflix was promising you could get whatever you wanted because they owned the distribution rights for pretty much every studio because everyone else was afraid to jump in. So they had a massive segment of the market that was exclusively theirs, like the early days of Amazon. And unless someone comes in and delivers something that you can't, there's no reason for people to venture too far afield, especially if people are economically crunched. And that's why, even though Disney Plus can boast about the number of subscribers it has, it's also having to spend a lot of money. It's also having to come across a very horrible realization that Disney really doesn't have that many titles. When you actually think about how many movies Disney made, its animation movies aren't that many in number. And its live action stuff is by and large not stuff that has even that much nostalgia appeal. So you can only watch the computer wore tennis shoes X number of times before you're absolutely sick of it. And that's really one of the reasons they bought Fox, which was actually, which was kind of an ingenious deal if they hadn't spent twice what it was worth. But you know, they were flying high on money and it didn't matter what their cash flow was. I mean, their cash flow was fine, so it didn't really matter what their return on investment was, at least for the short term. And what we've seen is with the debut of all the other streaming services, which have to a last one underperformed expectations, that money seems to have already hit the point where audiences aren't going to increasingly buy new services. Or if they do a new service, they drop their previous one because it's easy. You don't have to get on the phone and try to haggle with the cable company in order to cancel your Netflix for a few months. You just click a button. So it's way too easy. What are the sustaining numbers of people who have kept Disney Plus for over a year? What are the sustaining numbers of people who have kept Netflix or HBO Plus? How many people actually have kept them straight through as opposed to pick up and drop. I'll say older people probably have because we were trained on cable. But for younger people, I would say that the churn rate is phenomenal. And then there comes the question, what does that mean? Does that mean that the churn rate is factored in to the numbers that are reported? In other words, is it possible that the same person is counted as 3 subscribers because they dropped and picked up? And how long is the lag between the time you drop it and you're considered someone who's dropped the service? So there could be some funny business with the number, to say nothing of the fact that Netflix is swimming in debt. Fortunately, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and Disney Plus have huge resources, so they can weather a lot of bad news and while they wait for their ships to come in. The other problem is China. China was looked at as an endless, bottomless Mary Poppins bag of money that would be bestowed upon great Hollywood geniuses to continue making bloated, overly expensive, unprofitable movies. Well, okay, I know there's been a lot of talk of white supremacy. I don't like that term. Being Asian, I don't like it. Instead, I prefer elite supremacism, where people who have a lot of money feel that they're smarter than everyone else, and they want to impose what they want on those other people. And that includes feeling that the Chinese are a bunch of idiots because they're still thinking of pearl-esque buck era. I'm serious as a heart attack about this. A lot of the people in Hollywood who are making deals with China actually think the average Chinese person might as well be Olan, played by Louise Rayner. So instead of looking at China and saying this money is going to come with massive strings attached, Hollywood looked at China as an endless piggy bank to continue bad business practices, and that they would have a stopgap that would come in from these endless funds. Well, we've seen, especially with the recent failure of 2 major Chinese-oriented titles, which, by the way, were cringy, like the same way Dragon Seed or Flower Drum Song are cringy, didn't work in China. Of course it wouldn't. I mean, it'd be almost as if Russia made a movie about the US and we're looking at it and we're going, oh, please. It gets every single detail wrong. So that money supply is starting to tighten. And not only that, but China is starting to make content demands. And while Hollywood is playing a woke game, what is happening in China? What has China said? Just by the way it treats posters, it's saying, we don't want Black actors. I hate to put it that way. That's what they've said. Otherwise, Disney wouldn't have kowtowed and redone their Star Wars posters. Do you think Ava DuVernay's film about the Central Park 5 got distribution in China? I will say no. You know what else China doesn't really like? China really doesn't like LGBT people. And before you say, Dan, you're such a homophobe, I happen to be gay, so forget that one. So we're going to see that starting to get a crunch down as well. If you want Chinese money, conform to what Chinese people will accept, or the government of Chinese people will accept. So you're having that as having been another reason why profligate spending was okay. There's no excuse. No one would have ever greenlit The Irishman to cost $175 million, or however much was spent on Mank. Those were wastes of cash, because they were never going to come close to getting that back in terms of new subscribers or in terms of box office. So why is that continuing? Why? And as always, the Academy Awards have always been propaganda for Hollywood. And what do I mean by propaganda for Hollywood? Do you know why the Academy Awards were founded originally? It's because Hollywood was afraid of unionization, especially among the below-the-line crafts. So they put together an award show to advertise the industry, and it happened to have worked better than they planned. But when you look and say, wow, how did Janet Gaynor and Emil Jannings, would go on to become a massively popular Nazi actor, win the first 2 Oscars? was voted on by a committee of probably less than 15 people. Okay, so the Academy Awards has always been rather suspicious in terms of why it awards certain movies so many prizes. So the Oscars were always there for the public. They were always there to kind of give the Academy cover for some of its nefarious behaviors and for some of its very blatantly capricious nature towards non-mainstream culture. So this is a continuation of movements that have happened in the past. There was a big movement toward what we now call social justice in the 60s, and that suddenly disappeared. There was another big movement toward it in the late 80s, early 90s. Again, that disappeared. So I'm warning people who think that all the talk of diversity means that Hollywood has really changed. No, it hasn't. Trust me, the looking at content and saying we want a more diverse audience is only going to work until it doesn't. And then it will go away. In the 90s, it was especially egregious. You had an Hispanic revolution. You had all of these Chinese movies coming in and independent filmmakers making them. You had you had two Black renaissances going at the same time. And within 3 years, all of it was gone. Why? Wall Street came in, started investing in vertically integrated companies. All of the people who made decisions suddenly went from being people who were interested in successful entertainment art to being replaced by Wall Street people who were only interested in making deals that would allow for more venture capital to flow in. All right, you made your bed, now lay in it. So overall, what's going on in Hollywood right now is merely the result of people at the top not caring enough to try to cherish the business, to try to go to people who are really talented and nurture them and give them an opportunity with an appropriate budget so that the audience can expand incrementally. So until you fix the problem at the top, it really doesn't matter what the stars and the above the line talent say, because that can all be easily fixed. You just suddenly drop someone and they no longer make movies or TV shows. Okay, because they no longer make money. But at the top, eventually you're going to cripple the industry and get it to the point where for someone like me, who became a film teacher, who was an industry, who had a vice presidency in the industry and now teaches film, I learned it because in Mrs. Maley's math class, my friend Rob and I would give each other Academy Awards quizzes instead of studying algebra. And that was the most useful thing I ever did, even though it caused me to have to stand out in the hall a couple of times, because it is more important for what Hollywood's future is to know that Celeste Holm won Best Supporting Actress in 1947 than it is to understand both sides of an equation. But that's why so many of us love the movies, because it gave us an opportunity to explore that other side of ourselves. And I really hope that as has come to fruition in the past, that Hollywood gets over its current obsession and goes back to understanding that the more people who love your movie, the better. And it doesn't matter where they came from.
I did say enjoy our last film, Mr. Buddha.
Enjoy? My dear fellow, we are not so old-fashioned as that. It is not the purpose of the modern cinema to entertain. Never, no. We use our cameras today as a surgeon uses his scalpel. Ah, Schwarzbacher entertainment, really.